It was Friday and I'd just been to the co-op to do some shopping. Nice bit of ham for my tea and a bit of mustard as I'd run out. And I was just passing down the aisle and I noticed a couple of apple turnovers in a plastic box. And now I hadn't had an apple turnover for a long time, so I popped them in my basket. And I was putting the shopping on the conveyor belt and the young lad behind me in the queue said, "You shouldn't be buying things with all that plastic packaging on, love. Do you know how much damage it's causing? Don't you watch Blue Planet?" I didn't know what to say, so I just ignored him, and I paid the young girl on the till for the things I'd just bought. She was pleasant enough, with a ring through her nose, and a tattoo on her wrist. I packed the things in my shopping trolley and was on my way out the shop when the young lad caught me up. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to be rude. Perhaps you'd like one of these." He pushed a leaflet into my hand and asked if I'd ever heard of Greta Thunberg or something. "Greta who?" I said. "Where does she come from? She sounds foreign." "She's Swedish," he said. "She's only 18 and she started the school strike for the climate. Well, she didn't go to school on Fridays, protesting outside the Swedish Parliament about climate change. She's talked to the United Nations and to the World Economic Forum and all sorts of people. She's a real inspiration for us," he says, and that's why we're protesting on a Friday. We're part of a group called Fridays for Future. "What do you mean, climate change?" I asked him. "Don't you know that the climate's changing and that we're going to get more storms and heavy rain and droughts? It's all the carbon dioxide we're sending into the atmosphere from our car exhausts and industry and power stations, and if we don't do something about it, the world might not be fit to live in another 30 years. "But things have always changed," I said. "And anyway, if it happens in another 30 years, to be honest, it won't bother me because I won't be here." "Do you have grandchildren?" he asked. "The changes are happening now, and it'll be your grandchildren and their parents who'll have to deal with the consequences." I didn't say anything about James and Lucy, my Janets too. I wasn't going to let him know my business. By this time we'd reached the bus stop, so I said I was going to wait for my bus. "Nice talking to you," he said. "Please, read the leaflet and think about your grandchildren." The young lad crossed the road and joined a group of others outside the council offices. They were wearing those bright green and yellow jackets, high-vis, I think they call them, and they were carrying banners and placards. "There is no planet B," said one of them, and "Strike for the climate" was on another. There were a couple of young policemen there, watching what was going on. They couldn't have been much older than those with the high-vis jackets and the placards. A couple of other people were taking photographs of what was going on using their phones. It seems odd to me, a phone's now a camera, and people don't use them much to talk to each other. Anyway, after a few minutes, the group in the high-vis jackets were joined by some others, all carrying banners. There was a mixture of people there now, some older, some young children with their mothers. Some of them should probably have been in school. They all started chanting and waving their banners, but then the number 24 arrived and I got on. By the time I'd reached home, I'd sort of forgotten about what happened. Surly bus driver insisted on parking about 4 feet away from the curb, so I had to do a big step down into the road and he pulled away again before I could get onto the pavement. Then the postman had left a pile of junk mail on the mat in the porch, so it was difficult for me to get the front door to open it. Anyway, eventually I got into the house, sorted out the mail, nothing interesting, at least no bills, and I put away the things I bought. I found the leaflet the young lad had given me, mixed up among the shopping, and I put it on the side to read later. So after a bit, I put the kettle on, made a cup of tea, get myself settled on the big armchair by the window and had a look at the leaflet. Well, it was interesting. All about climate change, global warming, greenhouse gases and how much damage we've been doing on the air since we started burning coal and oil. And if we're going to stop it getting warmer, we have to stop drilling for oil and burning coal and using petrol and diesel in our cars. I've never really taken much notice of this before. When something came on the news about it, I tended to switch off and think about something else. But this Greta Thunberg girl, she certainly seemed to be stirring things up. Apparently, the local council has done something about declaring a climate emergency. They haven't done much else. I must admit, I got a bit lost there with the talk of climate emergencies and what have you, but it did make me think. In fact, I couldn't stop thinking about it and wondering why we haven't been told more. So later on, I rang our Janet to see how things were. She was a bit surprised to hear from me, as it wasn't the weekend, but I asked if I could talk to James and Lucy. They're Janet's little ones, 9 and 6, smashing pair of kids. Anyway, I asked James if he knows anything about climate change or global warming, and it turns out he does. He says it's a real problem, and if we don't start to do something about it really soon, it'll be too late. And now it's all our fault, older people, but it's them that's going to suffer for it. I have to admit, I got a bit tearful about it when I came off the phone because I just didn't understand. Why have we not been told about this before? A bit later, when there was nothing to watch on the telly, I got to thinking about this climate change thing and I read that leaflet again. There was a message on the bottom of the leaflet saying it had been produced by a local group, Action on Climate Emergency. There was the usual website information and email addresses, but I'm not that good on the computer, so I'm not bothered about those things. But there was a telephone number, so I rang it. Nice woman answered the phone. I said who I was and that a young lad had given me a leaflet about them in the co-op the other day. She said it was nice to hear from me and how could she help? So I said I didn't know a lot about climate change, but what I'd read on the leaflet was interesting, and when I spoke to the grandkids, well, they knew all about it and they were really quite upset about it. I asked how to find out some more and what could I do? Anyway, long story short, she told me there was a little group meeting in that nice-looking cafe opposite the butcher's shop the next morning, and I'd be very welcome if I decided to come along. She said there'd be people there who could explain more to me, and that there were a couple of books she could lend me to help find out a bit more. She said to be sure to ask for Kirsty if I decided I wanted to come along. And so I went. I hadn't been to the cafe before, but when I got there, went to the counter, I treated myself and ordered a big mug of hot chocolate with some cream on it. Well, the girl who served me was called Nikki. At least that's what it said on her name badge. Anyway, I asked Nikki if she knew Kirsty. She said she did. And after she'd done my drink, which, by the way, was very good, she took me through to the back room where there was a small group of people, maybe 10 or 12, and called over this tall young woman with blonde curly hair. And this turned out to be Kirsty. Anyway, I explained who I was and that we talked on the phone the day before. She seemed really nice. She said she was pleased I'd got myself a drink and then she'd introduce me to some people. There was a nice group of people. A few young ones, a couple more professional types. I think one said he was a teacher and another did something with the internet. But there were some older people too. Kirsty introduced me to Jane, who it turns out is 4 years older than me. Jane used to work at the university until she retired about 12 years ago. She worked for one of the professors there, who was a specialist in climate science, whatever that is, and it was from him that she learned about climate change, or climate breakdown, as she called it. It's a really serious problem, says Jane, and the government doesn't want to do anything about it. And although they've known for years the companies that are drilling for oil and gas have rubbished the science and the scientists, this means that most people, like you, don't know much about what's happening and why we need to do something. Well, I was a bit taken aback at this, but she said it in a nice way, and I don't think she was having a go at me for not knowing. I mean, how are we all supposed to know all this stuff? She said. While it's a bit late for you and me, I want to do something about it for all those young people who are starting at the university this year and next. And that's why I'm involved and come to these meetings. I like Jane. But it was obvious from the way she spoke that this whole thing had got her quite upset. She said how all the warnings from scientists and other people, well, they'd just been ignored because everybody's too busy trying to make money. And how the governments know what's going to happen, but they're too bothered about getting re-elected to take real action. Then there was a talk by a young girl called Sarah. She can't have been much more than 20. But, she knew so much about what was going on. Anyway, Sarah told us about something called, I think, a COP. I thought this was slang for a policeman, but apparently it's short for Conference of the Parties. Well, these are big meetings of lots of important people from all over the world who come together to do something about climate change and global warming. Jane said that for all the good these conferences do, they'd be better off staying at home and avoiding all the flying. She says that aeroplanes put a lot of these greenhouse gases into the air, so we shouldn't fly. To be honest, last time I flew was when our Janet took me and her dad to Spain before the kids came along. I didn't enjoy it very much. Anyway, according to Sarah, these big conferences are all very well, but what we need is action. We need governments to actually do some of the things they keep promising to do. And we need big companies to stop lying to us about their emissions. And we need the richest people who are responsible for massive amounts of greenhouse gases to cut back on all the damaging things they do, like flying everywhere in private jets and having so many houses in different parts of the world and yachts and things like that. She also said they haven't got long to make the changes and to stop polluting the air with climate change gases. But we can't rely on governments and businesses and rich people to do the right thing without some pushing. So we're going to have to take more direct action. Now, I'm not used to people talking so directly like this, and I wasn't sure at that point what she meant, especially by direct action. Anyway, it turns out Jane agrees with Sarah, and she said to me she didn't think these COPs make much difference at all. Apparently there's been 26 of them already, one every year or so since something called the Earth Summit in 1992. But the amount of greenhouse gases in the air has just gone up while they've all been talking. Then the organiser, Kirsty, thanked us all for coming and said something about a protest that's happening at the start of next month. Seems like a group from here is going to Leeds to join a big march to let people know more about climate breakdown, as Jane calls it, and she was inviting people to join them. Jane said that she was going, and without thinking about it, I told Kirsty I'd go along too. I'm not sure why I did that. I enjoyed the get-together and meeting Jane and hearing all about the COPs, but I don't know what possessed me to agree to go along to that march. I mean, it's not like me at all to do something on the spur of the moment like that, but what I'd heard at the meeting was making me cross again, and with Jane being so upset and what have you, I just volunteered. I told James what had happened. And he said, "Good for you, Nan. It's really great you want to do something about it." Seems like there's a group from year 6 at the school that are going to with the teachers and some of the mums and dads. James wants to go, but he's not allowed because he's too young. Anyway, James must have told our Janet about it, because the next thing I know, she's on the phone telling me I can't go and I'm too old, and why do I want to go getting involved in something like that at my age? So I said that what I'd learned made me cross and upset, and wanted to do something about it for her and for Mark and James and Lucy, and why wasn't she going too? She just sort of blustered at that and said she had no intention of doing anything like it, and I should be ashamed. Well, that got me a bit cross again, and we had a few words. I was really worried about it for the next few days, so I rang Kirsty again to tell her I was sorry, but I couldn't go to the protest march. She was very understanding and accepted what I was saying, said that not everyone was comfortable about protesting in this way, but that the group felt there wasn't much else they could do about it. And she thanked me for my interest and for going to the meeting, and said she hoped I'd be at the next one when they'd tell us all about it. Perhaps in the meantime I might feel more comfortable writing to our MP about it and asking him to do something. Well, I can't imagine what good that would do, writing to our MP, but Kirsty says we have to do all we can, and a lot of small actions can have a big effect. I thought that was it, but the next day I had a telephone call, and it was Jane, the nice woman I'd met at the meeting. She said she was sorry I wasn't going to go to the protest and what had changed my mind. I told her all about my conversation with Janet and how she'd told me I should be ashamed, and what sort of example was I setting to the grandkids. A good example, said Jane. Anyway, we had a long conversation. I don't know her very well, and she's a lot more intelligent than me, but I like Jane. She knows so much more about this, and she wants to make a difference. In the end, she persuaded me that I should go, and that she'd be there and we'd have a good time together. She said it was important that our generation shows what climate breakdown means to us and to our families. She said she'd come round in the next few days and bring me some things to read and show me a couple of films about it from YouTube, so I knew more about what was going on. Jane came round the next day. She brought me a little book called No One is Too Small to Make a Difference by that Greta Thunberg. I can't believe she's so young and she explains things so clearly. Why don't all the people she talks to listen to her and do something? Oh, it makes me so cross. Jane also showed me some videos on YouTube, and I've watched them, and also some of the Blue Planet documentaries by that nice Sir David Attenborough. I didn't really take much notice of them when they were on telly originally, and some of the things he shows us aren't very nice, but he makes it all so real. The damage we're doing and the problems it's causing now and for the next few years. The more I watch and read, the more sorry I am for what we're leaving for James and Lucy and all the other young ones. Well, that was interesting. Our Janet's going to be furious. I've been arrested. Well, I'm not really sure what I've done wrong, but after we'd all sat down outside the town hall, lots of police started to appear. They didn't look like ordinary police, the sort you see on the street. They were more like the ones you see on telly when there's a riot going on or something, all done up in black with crash helmets and visors. A bit scary, really. So, we all gathered on Woodhouse Moor, just outside Leeds Centre. I don't know how many of us were there, and it was a bit frightening being in such a big crowd, but Jane was with me, and it was all very good-natured. When everyone had got there, Kirsty from the meeting at the cafe, well, she stood on a stepladder, and she made a little speech with a megaphone. Other people, again with high-vis jackets on, were handing out placards and whistles for us to use on the march. Well, we set off along Woodhouse Lane and picked up more people as we wound our way around the university area. It was all a bit slow and noisy, but there were people on the street who were clapping us as we marched past, and some of the drivers sounded the horns. We went a long way round for the sake of it, but eventually we arrived at the square in front of Leeds Town Hall, and then we all sat down. Jane had thought of everything, and she gave me a cup of tea from her flask, and she got a little foam pad for me to sit on as well. After a while, with people in the crowd chanting and shouting stuff, well, I couldn't hear very well. Some important-looking policemen stood in front of us with a megaphone, telling us to disperse. Now we all sat tight. After about half an hour like this, I don't mind telling you, I was getting a bit stiff from sitting on that hard ground in the cold, even with Jane's cushion and a flask of tea. That was it. Groups of people sitting there on the square outside the town hall, chatting away but not moving. After a bit, the senior-looking policeman with the megaphone came back and announced that the protest was over and that we should all move on, go back to our homes. Well, I was about to get up, but Jane said, no, not time yet. So we all sat there for a bit longer, and more police came and sort of surrounded us. I wasn't sure about this, and I was getting a bit worried, but Jane said, just be calm and sit tight, as there were a lot of us. Then the policeman with the megaphone said again that the protest was over and we should disperse peacefully. Some of the younger ones shouted back at him and waved their placards. I didn't think they were being threatening or aggressive, but it seemed like this was just the excuse the police wanted. They waded into the group and they started grabbing at some of the people, and then a couple of them took hold of one of the young men and started to carry him towards some police vans that had pulled up alongside the square. Then they moved in and they started picking people up and carrying them to the minibuses that had appeared behind these police vans. This was all of us, apart from the mums with young kids. They were persuaded to move on by some of the others in the group. Well, when they got to me, there was this young lad with a clipboard who was one of the protest leaders, telling me to relax and not to fight it. I was a bit nervous, I can tell you, but I did as he told me. Two of the policemen came over to me and one said, I'm arresting you on suspicion of committing a breach of the peace and anything you say may be used in evidence, or something like that. It was just like on the detective programmes on the television. Well, next they picked me up, one under the arms, one under the ankles. Well, I didn't say anything and I just relaxed, and they carried me to the row of vans and minibuses. The young lad walked with me, and when we got there, one of the policemen said he wanted me to get in. The young lad told me it was all right and I should do as I was told. Just as I was getting into the minibus, a well-dressed woman with bright red hair barged past the policeman and pushed a microphone under my nose. Have you been arrested? She asked. Well, I suppose so, I said. I'm not sure. Has she been arrested? She said to the policeman and pushed the microphone towards one of them, and he nodded. Why were you taking part in the protest today? She asked me, pushing the microphone back towards my face. Because I want my grandchildren to have a world they can live in comfortably when they're grown up. We've had it so good for so long, and I didn't understand we were doing so much damage. It's for them, and I'd do it again. With that, the policeman pushed me towards the minibus, and I climbed in. When it was full, they brought us here. Well, Janet was absolutely livid, you can imagine, but young James was very proud, and he's been telling all his friends at school that his nan's a climate protester, and she was arrested. I was on the television news too, telling that reporter why I wasn't sorry. And then someone from the local paper called me later. I talked to her for a little while, and she told me the story about me being arrested will be in the paper next week. Well, after getting arrested and taken to the police station in Leeds, we were all given something called a caution, and basically told not to be so stupid and not to do anything like that again. Well, I don't know what came over me, but I said to the young policeman who was telling me this, he ought to be ashamed of himself, and he should have been protesting, not arresting people. He looked a bit embarrassed at that. As I leaned over the desk to sign a form to say that I'd been given a police caution, He whispered to me that I was right, and we do need to protest. A month ago, I didn't know anything about climate breakdown, but I now know what it is and how serious it is and how little time we've got to do anything about it. I want you to learn, like me, and think about the type of world we're leaving behind. My friend, Jane, calls us the golden generation. We've had everything. Money, jobs, holidays, houses, and a climate that was not out of control. But us having all this means that before we go and leave everything to the next generation, and the one after that, we're going to see the effects of climate breakdown with drought, floods, sea level rise and climate migration. There's still a little bit of time to avoid the worst, but please, just learn from me. Do something about it. I don't want James and Lucy to have to live in that kind of world. Me? Oh, I'm on another protest in Manchester next week, and I'm ready to be arrested again.